Growing up, I went to many different churches and was exposed to several approaches to Christianity. In college, I read books and listened to some sermons that really convinced me of the truth of Christianity, although I never had a life-changing conversion experience. I really struggled with Christians and would always keep them at an arm's length. In my early 20s, I was looking for a church, but that season was filled with self-sabotage, and I would often sneak out the back early of a service and never return.
So as a kid, I used to fixate on counting things, and when I couldn't figure out the number, like the dots in the ceiling or the bolts on a bridge, I would be comforted by the thought that God knew that number. Growing up with a Jewish father and a Catholic mother who converted to Judaism, we spent a lot of time at temple. However, a personal relationship with God was foreign to me. So when we moved down here to Houston, I was chatting with a coworker of mine, and she was talking openly about her faith, and she entertained all of my questions. But since we were both therapists, and I'm a rule follower, and therapists have strict boundaries, I didn't know if it was okay for me to ask what church she went to. So after she dropped a couple of clues, Dave and I did some investigation, and we figured out what church it was.
So one weekend when Hannah was out of town, I went to this church, and par for course, right at the end of the service at communion, I was sneaking out the back door when something very strange happened. The band struck up a secular song that was a very personal song to me, kind of secretly one of my favorites from childhood and very comforting. And in that moment, I felt that over all these years, maybe I hadn't been pursuing a relationship with God, that He actually was pursuing me. And so I called Hannah. I said, look, I think we should try this church. Let's give it a shot. And over the next couple of weeks, we did the exact opposite of every instinct. I would sing. We would stay afterwards and we'd talk to people. We volunteered in the nursery. We would attend events. And most counterintuitive of all, we joined a small group, which was our first experience in a Christian community. During this season, I did feel hyper-vigilant and protective of Hannah, especially with all the things about Christianity that I thought would be offensive. And during this time, I was very surprised at all the things that were not offending her.
So things like volunteering and building relationships were part of my values. So Christianity didn't seem so far-fetched, but the Jesus part was much harder. It felt really fake to call myself a Christian when the belief of Jesus was missing. So I had worked in years in trauma, and one year I went to a workshop about trauma and the gospel, and the leader wove Jesus and the resurrection into trauma, everything I knew and believed about trauma and attachment. And once he talked about all of our biological longings for a perfect father, something for me just clicked, and I ended up leaving the workshop in tears. That next morning, I told Dave we were on our way to church, and I told Dave that I wanted to follow Jesus.
And boom, just like that, the life-changing conversion experience I've been looking for my whole life was experienced in Hannah, right before my eyes.